Well, good morning, Community Bible Church. I hope that you are doing well. I hope that you are keeping safe and that you are keeping sane during this time. This morning, we're going to be doing our second sermon in a sermon series of 4 sermons about the topic of anxiety. And we're going to talk about anxiety and the economy. But before I do, I want to talk about reopening the church. Right now, we are trying to listen to the governor, trying to listen to Whitley County leaders and the mayor about when to reopen the church. And also, we're talking about how to reopen the church once we can, what that might look like. So I wanted to just communicate with you that we are trying to put together a plan. I don't know exactly, again, when that will be, but we will let you know. Now, some of you are ready to jump in. You want to, if the church was open today, you'd be there and you want to get together and you want to worship and just be together. And I totally get it. I'm the same way. But others of you, you might not want to return anyway, and I just want you to know there's no judgment for that. You can get here when you get here. I realize all the complexities of this situation. So all that to say, we are looking at trying to reopen the church sometime in the near future, and we will let you know when that will be. But today we're going to talk about anxiety in the economy. The economy has been basically like a roller coaster. And I don't know about you, but some people, when they think of Cedar Point and Space Mountain and some other roller coasters, they love roller coasters. They like screaming at the top of their lungs. They like the adrenaline of just going fast. They love the rush of roller coasters. And some other people, they hate roller coasters. When they think of roller coasters, they think of throwing up, or they think of a news story they heard where the roller coaster went off and people died. So one person's joy is a source of terror for other people. One person, they trust the roller coaster, and another person, they don't trust the roller coaster. One person believes that the roller coaster will eventually stop and they'll get off and everything will be okay. And others think that they're going to die, they're going to be in the hospital, something bad is going to happen, and they just want out of the roller coaster. I don't know which person you are, but obviously we are living in a roller coaster right now. Not only do we have this coronavirus, this health crisis that is happening right now, but because of the coronavirus, the residual effects have been that it's impacted our economy and our finances a lot. The government has said a lot of people are filing for unemployment. A lot of people have lost their jobs, or they might lose their jobs, or they might have to go on temporary leave. The stock market has crashed and is very unpredictable. Even oil and gas aren't doing well, even though that's not related. A lot of people have lost a lot of money in their 401ks. Businesses have had to make really, really hard decisions about whether to stay open, whether to be closed, who to fire, just some really difficult economic things. And the hardest part of it is not knowing when it will recover. Most experts believe that it will take a while for this all to shake out. And it's caused a lot of stress for all of us, and it's impacted every one of us. We've had to make financial decisions, think about our finances. Businesses especially have had to make a lot of decisions, and we don't know exactly when this roller coaster is going to stop. We don't know when things are going to stabilize. We don't know how long it's going to be. We, again, have anxiety about our jobs, about our positions. We have to make decisions about when to save, or do we spend, money that we get in stimulus payments. There's just a lot of unknowns. And the truth is, we really just don't know what the future holds. And so individuals are struggling with finances, businesses are struggling, even the government is struggling to know how to deal with this crisis. Now, our church, Community Bible Church, we have talked as deacons about the possible impact on our church, and we have tried to be good stewards. We've tried to use wisdom. We've cut some spending, some costs that we normally have. We've tried to freeze our spending as much as possible. We've tried to make our building very efficient. And also we've tried to encourage people, if they have the means, to help people who are in need. Just a couple weeks ago, someone from Community Bible asked me what they could do, and we came up kind of with a plan, and they were able to encourage the people working at Kroger in Columbia City by giving them pizzas for dinner. We sent about 5 or 6 pizzas over. And again, those little things, they really matter. But today we're going to look at anxiety and the economy. And I want to start out with a text from Luke 12:16-21. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, well, what should I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample good laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. This man, he had it all. It says in verse 16, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. He had a lot. So what he does is he builds bigger barns for himself. I mean, he had it made. He kind of had the American dream. And what he does is he hoards it and he keeps it for himself. He builds his own kingdom. So he gets a lot. He gets a blessing from God and he uses it for himself. And it's very interesting. God says, he calls him a fool. Whenever I think of the word fool, I know this really doesn't have anything to do with the message, but I always think of Mr. T in the A-Team, and he would say, I pity the fool. But anyway, he calls him a fool. It's very, very harsh language. And the instruction we get here is not to trust in wealth. It says in verse 21, so a fool, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So we have to ask ourselves this important question. During these turbulent economic times, what does it mean for us to be rich toward God? During these financial times where there's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety about the economy, what does it mean for us to be rich toward God? Really, the questions that we can ask ourselves is during this time is, how can I help others? How can I encourage someone else during this time? And yes, if we're able to help someone financially, there are people who need help financially. We can do that. We can support Christian organizations, or we can help someone out, a neighbor who has a financial need, if we're able. But we really have to ask the question, what does it mean to be rich toward God? Maybe that means that we call someone and we check in on them during these times. Maybe it means that we donate things to someone or some organization that has a lot of people with needs. Or maybe it means running to the grocery store and helping someone, or maybe calling someone who's struggling. I think all of us are having our bad days right now. We're all struggling to sometimes just to find the purpose in all this, and we really want things to go back to normal. But first of all, what we can do about the finances right now is we can be rich toward God. Now, a lot of our culture teaches that we should be financially independent. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Working hard and getting paid for it, that's great. But we have to ask the question, what happens when we arrive? And what happens a lot of times is many times when we get a lot, when we're blessed with a lot, we use it instead of helping others. We use it to make a name for ourselves. We want to be great ourselves, or at least be seen as great by other people. And so a lot of times we can have these wrong motives. We try to get ahead, make a name for ourselves, and build our own kingdoms, and we build a fortress around ourselves. And so it's very important now that we're rich toward God, because when we think about how God defines greatness, how Jesus defined greatness, it is completely different than what our culture teaches. Mark 10:42-45 says this, "And Jesus called them to him and said to them, 'You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant.'" Let me repeat that. "But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So what we need during this time of economic turbulence is we need servants. We need people who are going to use their own resources to make masks. There's people that are going and cheering on the nurses. There's people that are writing positive messages on their driveways. I mean, we really have seen the really good in humanity. We've seen the good servants come out during this time. There's even doctors that have gone from the Midwest and gone to New York to try to help people with this coronavirus. So we have really seen servants act. And so right now, what we need to do in relation to this economy and these financial times is we need to be rich toward God, and we need to be a servant. If you look back in church history during the Roman Empire, the early church was no stranger to plagues, to epidemics, and to mass hysteria. There's both Christian and non-Christian accounts that they both say the same thing. One of the main catalysts that helped the early church grow inside an empire was how Christians handled disease, suffering, and death. In fact, the church's response, it made such an impact on Roman society. Even pagan Roman emperors complained to pagan priests about their declining numbers, basically saying, you need to step up your game like the Christians. And so what the Christians were doing back then, in light of all these epidemics that were happening and these plagues, what was happening, it was horrible back then. Actually, in AD 249 to AD 262, Western civilization was devastated by one of the deadliest pandemics ever. It's said in Rome, in the Roman Empire, 5,000 people would die every day. In the AD 362, Julian, who was a pagan leader, he complained that these Romans, they needed to match these Christians in their virtue. And he blamed the recent growth of Christianity on their benevolence to strangers, their care for other people, and the holiness with which they lived their lives. He wrote this, "For it is a disgrace that the impious Galilean Christians support not only their own poor, but ours as well." And so, while most non-Christians back then, during this plague, they were characterized by self-protection and self-preservation and avoiding the sick at all costs, the Christian response was completely opposite. And this had two really big impacts back then on society. The first one, Christians they sacrificed for their fellow believers, and they stunned the unbelieving world as they witnessed this communal love that the church had for each other and that Christians had for each other. And second of all, the Christians sacrificed for non-Christians, and this resulted in the early church experience a lot of growth as a lot of non-Christian survivors who benefited from the care of Christian caregivers and neighbors converted to Christianity. Again, Christians back then were a wonderful testimony during a dark time. And that is an opportunity that we have today. And so, again, there can be two responses to this: to be a servant, to sacrifice, or we can try to self-preserve ourselves and self-protect ourselves. Christianity back then exploded because it had servants. Really, now is the time during a crisis to be the church. So we have to find a way, again, to serve others and to be rich toward God. I don't know how many of you remember Y2K in the year 2000. Everyone had so much fear about the computers going and that the world would end, and there was all these talk and all this commotion. It just produced a lot of fear. But let me say this: fear is never a proper basis on which to make decisions. We have to live our lives by faith, and that's demonstrated by hope, by optimism, even in the midst of these difficult times that we have right now. And when fear is rampant, like it is right now, these are opportunities to share the love of Christ. And so, yes, there's a lot of turbulence right now. There's a roller coaster in the economy. This is the time to be the church. And so, yes, we should use our wisdom that God's given us about money. And yes, we could save some money. We can be resourceful. We can spend our stimulus checks wisely. And God's called us to be good stewards of what He's given to us. So yes, we need to use wisdom, but we can grow so anxious in thinking about self-preservation and building our own kingdom. God really calls us, again, to be rich toward God and to serve other people. And so we really have to prioritize loving our neighbors over preserving earthly riches. God has called us to be rich toward God and to be servants. So let's wrestle with that and what that means this week. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week.